and a 10-second times the charm. Could William have suffered a Springlock failure before getting trapped in the spring bodysuit like we see happen in FNAF 3? In a way it's possible, and it appears like that's the case in the FNAF novels, since William is described as having scars that are consistent with a Springlock failure before becoming Springtrap in the books. So could it have happened in the games? Could William have been the reason the Springlock suits were retired in the first place, since we hear of an unfortunate incident at the sister location? So is that unfortunate incident actually William? There are plenty of other people that it could be as well, but William having to deal with it would certainly get them put out of commission, at least for a time. But with William continuing to use the suits afterwards and putting it on like we hear in FNAF 3, and then again he ends up failing in FNAF 3 as well, it's unlikely, so no. And at 9, Golden Fredbear. One theory that I've seen plenty of times, and I'm pretty sure mostly started around FNAF 4, was that Golden Freddy and Fredbear are the same animatronic, suggesting that the reason Golden Freddy is all limp and lifeless in the original FNAF and FNAF 2 is because his endoskeleton was removed after Crying Child's bite in 1983, and that's why the suit has to teleport around and cause hallucinations, because it can't physically move. This would also probably mean that Crying Child would be the one in the Golden Freddy suit. However, we know that this isn't true, based on characters being separate in Ultimate Custom Night, although I guess that might not mean much, and just like coloring and size. Since Golden Freddy is much smaller than Fredbear would have to be, since Fredbear would have to accommodate a human plus the robot parts, and Golden Freddy wouldn't, since, you know, Golden Freddy would just be an animatronic and not a Springlock suit. But honestly, at this point, the actual design doesn't really seem to matter much apparently, since Springtrap went to Scrap Trap and then went to Burn Trap. But from the evidence, it seems like Golden Freddy is merely an illusion or a hallucination created in the mind of Michael Afton. See our Golden Freddy was never real video for more info on that, because that proves this idea wrong. And you're all gonna be mad at me, but you know what? That video deserves more love, or at least interaction. And at 8, Elizabeth Afton. I've seen a few people asking if or assuming that Elizabeth Afton was a victim of a Springlock failure, and the truth is, she wasn't. The Circus Baby animatronic isn't a Springlock suit, since a Springlock suit in this case is defined as a suit that contains robotic parts, but uses a special mechanism that when cranked moves those robotic parts to the side so that a person can climb inside and wear the robot like a suit. The Baby animatronic isn't one of those, because there's no way to actually wear this animatronic. Baby it's just a robot, so there is no way that she could have Springlocked Elizabeth. Elizabeth is just a normal victim of her father's killing spree, which resulted in her somehow wanting to make him proud, despite him being the reason she's dead. Directly. Like, not even an, he just because he made the animatronic thing. No. Nobody else had a hand in her death aside from him. But she still wants to make him proud. I don't know, I guess Baby crushed her body and then her sanity too. Which, I mean, I'd understand. That's pretty rough. And at 7, Henry Emily. Now this is certainly an interesting case, because seemingly Henry has died multiple ways across FNAF canons, with his first apparent death being in FNAF World at the hands of Baby. His death in the novels seems to have happened before the Silver Eyes starts, and then he dies in FNAF 6 along with everything else. But could one of these deaths involve a Springlock failure or something having to do with Springlocks? I mean, maybe Afton offed Henry in one of these realities, finally actually, you know, took care of his worst enemy. Or maybe Baby has some Springlock mechanisms that's inside of her that she used to kill Henry. I mean, hell, maybe Henry just climbed into the wrong suit at the wrong time, or maybe the right suit at the right time for him. It's a question that we don't really pay attention to, because, I mean, Henry's death doesn't mean much to the story, unfortunately. I mean, it's true, it doesn't. Henry dying doesn't really mean much overall for the FNAF lore, okay? We didn't even know that he was alive until FNAF 6, for God's sakes. So maybe, for irony's sake, Scott had him bite the dust in a quicker way rather than just burning him alive. And at 6, unintentional. You see, there are a decent amount of people that for some reason think that these Springlock suits were made with pure intentions by William Afton. This kind of goes hand in hand with the idea that William started killing after losing his kids, but we know that that is not the case. Since thanks to the fast facts found in FNAF AR's files, we know that the Funtime animatronics were some of the first ones ever made, and considering the abilities of Baby at the very least, we know that these were made in order to kill. we know that was a thought in his brain, meaning that even if the Springlock animatronics were the very first animatronics ever, it's reasonable to think that they were also designed with death in mind, which explains multiple things. More on one of them in a minute, but honestly, if William made the fun times with death in mind, it's likely that he did the same with the Springlocks. And if you think that a suit that can snap at a moment's notice and shove pounds of metal bars, cogs, gears, and more into the same place your body would take up, it was made with pure intentions, then you need therapy more than I do, okay? I have some numbers you can call. Especially when a normal animatronic and then a suit for your employees would be cheaper and less likely the focus of a lawsuit. Speaking of which, in it for crying child. Okay, now this one's certainly gonna make people mad, but there's no way that I could do this list without mentioning the greatest debate of literally anyone yelling at me ever. The amount of people who have messaged me on Instagram or on TikTok yelling at me in my TikTok comments or in the YouTube comments telling me that the bite of 83 is somehow a Springlock incident bothers me to my core. I say this every time I bring it up. It's not a Springlock failure, okay? The fact that a load of people consider this to be a Springlock failure is the myth that I'm addressing. The reason I don't think it was a Springlock failure is because the Fredbear suit was already in animatronic mode, okay? There's no Springlocks that could have a chance of failing, since, you know, a Springlock failure refers to the Springlock mechanisms failing to hold the robotic bits away, meaning that it snaps back into animatronic mode when a person's inside. That's why it's bad if there's a person inside, and there would be no Springlock mechanisms inside the mouth either, because that would always be in animatronic mode. Like your head, your eyes would line up with the opening of the mouth so that, you know, you could see. So yeah, that's kind of. Plus, I don't think anyone who is 7 feet tall working at Freddy Fazbear's. No, they're in the NBA. The jaw also just moves up and down, okay? Truthfully, I don't know how much of the community believes this to be a Springlock incident, because the comments are always going to be filled with more people that are against it than for it, because if you're for it, you don't really feel the need to comment about it. But it's still concerning the amount of comments I'm seeing and the amount of DMs I get on Instagram, okay? Which, by the way, follow me on if you don't hate me, because I need to get past 20. I get to 19 and it goes back down. I have to get past the 120, you know? And at 3, Am I Real? Am I Real, also known as Cake Bear, is presumably the primary and most recurrent antagonist in Dormitabis. Am I Real has 2 different forms. His first form is Cake Bear. Cake Bear's design originated from the Save Him minigame, where he delivered cake to children while a kid is murdered outside. He is the predecessor of both Fredbear and Freddy Fazbear. Cake Bear is a brown bear animatronic that also acts like a Springlock suit that appears in most of the main nights. Although they do look similar, the only similarities he has to Freddy Fazbear in reality is that they both possess a top hat, are brown, have blue eyes, and are a bear. Am I Real's second form is a form that resembles Springtrap, however. This form has a green color much like Springtrap and contains human remains. His right eye socket has gotten bigger on the side, and a big hole can be seen on the right side of his head. His top hat has received some withering on it as well, and his lower jaw is slanted and worn down, no longer circular like Cake Bear's. He also has a sizable hole in the right side of his torso, revealing organs. Ha, lovely. Rips and tears cover his arms, revealing more human remains. He also appears to be missing at least 1 finger on his right hand, and it's absolutely terrifying to look at. Of course, 3 out of 10 of these are going to be from Dormitabis. Like, what did you think was gonna happen? Did you watch the Dormitabis animatronics list? But ultimately, in at number 2, Springlocks are real. Okay, you see, if I was to actually do like a cosplay of the purple guy and actually do it without it being a joke, I'd probably end up using a purple phone case, because, you know, I gotta reference the phone guy. But I don't need a Springlock crank, because those aren't actually a thing in real life. While the term Springlock is used in real life, it is a totally different mechanism from the actual FNAF thing, okay? I'm certain most of you got the whole Springlocks are real line from the Springlocks and You How Not to Die remastered thread on the FNAF wiki. However, actual Springlocks are just locks that use springs. From my research, what I gathered was that a Springlock in real life is in the simplest of terms, if your front door's deadbolt was on a spring. Every other instance talking about real Springlocks just simply brings you back to that page or quotes that page, so there's really only one source. Springlocks, as they're used in the games, do not exist in real life. Alright, that is a myth. The term is used, but it's 2 separate words instead of 1, and they mean totally different things. So please stop. In a 10 Springtrap. I believe we all know this story by now, okay? Everything was going well at first, they couldn't pin him down, and he was on his way to immortality. Once William discovered Remnant, however, he spiraled. He wanted to use it to fuel his life and make him truly immortal. So, in an effort to study it further, William lures the possessed animatronics to a back room that they can't normally access, and then uses it to dismantle them, planning to melt down their endoskeletons to make soul-infused metal. However, by doing this, he unknowingly releases the souls of the victims that he claimed so long ago. And seeing these victims causes William to panic. Understandably, I mean, they're freaking ghost kids, and they're also the ghosts of kids that you killed. So, yeah, then this absolute animatronic genius, the technician that has made the suits, handles the suit maintenance, and explained to every employee the proper procedure for putting these Springlock suits on, climbs into the Spring Bonnie suit that he actually uses to kill, and then climbs inside in such a panic that he actually didn't notice the moisture in the room, the leaking ceiling, and, you know, literally everything else, probably also his sweat, which caused the Springlocks that were active in this moment, since it was in suit mode, to fail. And I feel like that moment is one of the most confusing mysteries. Why did he do that? He knows better. If he can avoid the cops for that long, why did he think that this was all just gonna be fine? Dude. In at 9, Cassidy. Cassidy is the most mysterious victim in the missing children's incident. Okay, her name was hidden for years, only being revealed in the survival logbook, and then confirmed in the FNAF movie script Scott talked about in a post on Reddit. That script, though, was ultimately scrapped. And honestly, we don't really know much about her. We don't know how she died, and there are plenty of theories that claim to have evidence of her being a Springlock victim. Maybe William knew that would be an easier way than just, I don't know, a knife. I mean, after all, she does possess Golden Freddy, and some figure that he could be a Springlock suit that had the guts removed, hence the slumped over nature in his FNAF 1 and 2 forms. However, if this was the case, and Cassidy's body was in that suit, wouldn't they have found it when they were gutting the animatronic? But maybe, then again, William was the one who gutted it, considering how he was the suit technician. For a suit technician, though, he did miss a fatal flaw with the animatronics he literally designed, since he got in the suit when it was wet like we just talked about. But either way, Cassidy being a Springlock victim could be true, but it's still a mystery, at least until Scott acknowledges the idea. Until then, it's just a theory, so don't go around saying that it's fact. It's a mystery. We don't know. And it's 7, Kelsey. The New Kid from 1:35 a.m. is a story from 3rd Fazbear Fright's book. The story revolves around Devin, Mick, and Kelsey. Devin and Mick are outcasts. They aren't really popular, you know, they aren't cool. But when the new kid Kelsey arrives at their school, they try to make a new friend. Despite Kelsey being charismatic and adored by everyone in the school, over time Devin grows jealous of Kelsey, because, you know, he's adored and loved by everyone in the school. So, in an act of revenge, or to maybe try to gain control over him, Devin hatches a plan to lure Kelsey to an abandoned Freddy Fazbear's to trap him in a Springlock suit for a few hours. I guess to try to humble him, I guess? I don't know why you thought that this would be a good thing, but obviously the plan goes horribly wrong because it's a FNAF book. After getting in the suit, the Springlocks ended up failing, as expected, because it's a FNAF book, causing all of the blood to soak into the fur of the animatronic and pool around the ground. Devin and Mick leave Kelsey for dead so that they won't get in trouble, but then something doesn't feel right. So a week later, Devin returns to the scene of the crime to make sure Kelsey's body is still there. He sticks his hand in the animatronic's mouth because he doesn't think about fingerprints, and snap. The Springlocks fail yet again, as per usual, and Devin gets his hand stuck inside the suit and bleeds out. But not before seeing a body in the suit, with black hair instead of Kelsey's blonde hair. I don't know, okay? Could this be a character that we have yet to see in the games? Probably not. It's just a character in the book, alright? This doesn't happen in the games, okay? It's a myth. This is just a book thing, okay? Stop. And 6, Phone Guy. Phone Guy's death is one of the most mysterious deaths of all time, okay? We hear him die in FNAF 1 on night 4 with the sounds of multiple animatronics banging at his doors, but we never really get an explanation as to what happens to him. We know that he dies, but other than that, it's all speculation. One of the theories is that the animatronics got him and shoved him into a suit, resulting in a painful death, especially since at this point the Springlock suits were either still in operation or hadn't been totally removed. The actual timeline of events for the Springlock suits is a little messy, since we don't really have the exact years for the things getting scrapped, yet it's still possible that Phone Guy was shoved into one, or maybe he tried to use it to hide. After all, maybe Phone Guy is secretly William Afton, and Scott just doesn't want us to know that yet or something, and what we hear could just be be the FNAF 3 cutscene. I mean, I doubt it, but it would be absolutely hilarious if he ended up pulling that on us, okay? And for all those saying that phone guy can't be Afton because Afton is British or whatever, so is Tom Holland, okay? It's called acting. You can fake an accent, especially if you're a serial killer who's trying to evade everything, you know? Kinda, yeah, it's a thing. Halfway through into number 5, Garvey. A psychopathic, cold-blooded killer. He stopped being human long ago. That's how Garvey is described in the extras of Dormitabis, the game from which he hails. Garvey is the penultimate antagonist of Dormitabis, and as a human, he was the man who murdered the missing children. He later went on to get trapped in Spring Bonnie, becoming Springtrap, and then was burnt to a permanent death in the Fazbear Fright's fire. Garvey is a more gory version of Springtrap from FNAF 3. However, he is not William Afton, as the game was released before the name reveal, even before FNAF 4. Springtrap, but with hardly any exosuit or animatronic casing, whatever you want to call it. He crawls on all fours and uses his left hand as a foot and his left foot as a hand, like some demonic monkey from hell that Satan didn't sanction the creation of. Just look at this thing and tell me that it shouldn't be on this list. If you do, you'll be lying. In at 4, the Bite of 87. The Bite of 87 is such an infamous incident that I can already hear people groaning in the comments. However, what if the victim of the Bite of 87, whoever that was, is actually a victim of a Springlock failure? It could make sense, since the animatronics had no real harmful tendencies before this, so a Springlock failure is a reasonable assumption as to why someone got a frontal lobe removed. And a Springlock failure would definitely provide enough power to do that, since, you know, the Springlocks themselves would snap with a ferocious velocity, and would probably circumvent the whole needing more power to actually crush a skull thing. And if it was Jeremy, it would explain why the animatronics ended up getting suspended, because now one of their own employees was bit and then they had to promote him and then fork over some extra cash to make sure that he didn't sue. So yeah, was the Bite of 87 a Springlock failure? Maybe. And was it the moment that caused the Springlock suits to be retired? I don't know. Okay, it also could have been the FNAF 4 bite. But considering the FNAF 3 phone calls, it actually seems to be this bite though, since in FNAF 2 we hear about someone using one of the yellow suits and not mentioning the Springlocks until FNAF 3, meaning that they were probably still in use normally come 1985, and Crying Child died in 1983, so it was probably the Bite of 87 that got them suspended, so there you go. But ultimately, into number 2, Shadow Animatronics. One of the oldest theories is that the Shadow Animatronics are the first Springlock victims, and this comes to us after the FNAF 3 phone guy dialogue that mentioned multiple and simultaneous Springlock failures, which some interpreted as multiple Springlock suits failing at once, since the term Springlock in this situation is being used to describe the suit as a whole and not the actual individual mechanisms that make up the suit. So, the line of multiple and simultaneous Springlock failures could mean multiple of the Springlocks inside the suit failing at the same time, or just multiple suits failing. This led some to theorize that previous employees were killed in the Springlock suit, which is where the Shadow Animatronics come from. This is supported by the fact that these are both shadows of Freddy and Bonnie, the two animatronics that have Springlock versions. I mean, there are some holes in this theory, because, you know, one of them looks like Toy Bonnie, and Toy Bonnie's not a Springlock suit, but there is potential that this is the case, because again, designs consistency doesn't really seem to matter anymore. And finally, into number 1, Double Trouble. Could William have suffered a Springlock failure before getting trapped in the Springlock Bonnie suit that we see in FNAF 3? It is possible, okay, and it certainly appears like this could be the case in the FNAF novels. Well, it is the case in the FNAF novels, but because of that, it could be the case in the games. Since William in the books is described to have scars that are consistent with a Springlock failure before actually becoming Springtrap in the books. So, could it have happened in the games? Could William have been the reason that the Springlock suits were actually retired? Since we do hear of the unfortunate incident at a sister location, so is that unfortunate incident instead William? There are plenty of people that it could be, but William having to deal with it would certainly get them put out of commission, because, you know, he's kind of up there, and I mean, he doesn't really seem to care about anyone else, so if they failed on them, why would he retire them? But with William continuing to use the suit and putting it on after, you know, when like the room was wet in FNAF 3, this could be unlikely unless he just doesn't have the capacity for trauma, but it's still possible either way, okay? So since this list is about mysteries, I feel like this deserves to be on it. And you know what? Be the capstone. And at 10, William Afton. Again, could William have suffered a Springlock failure before getting trapped in the Spring Bonnie suit like we see in FNAF 3? It's possible, and it certainly appears like that's the case in the FNAF novels, since William is described to have scars that are consistent with the Springlock Springlock Failure before becoming Springtrap in the novels. So could it have happened in the games? Could William have been the reason the Springlock suits were retired? Since we hear of an unfortunate incident at the sister location, so is that unfortunate incident William? There are plenty of people it could be, but William having to deal with it would certainly get them put out of commission for a time. But with William continuing to use the suit and putting it on when the room was wet like we see in FNAF 3's cutscene, it suggests that that's probably unlikely, but it's still possible. So since this list is possible Springlock victims, I think he deserves to be on this list, at least at number 10, since can we really talk about Springlock victims without mentioning good old Willie Afton? Exactly. And at 7, Grim Fredbear. Grim Fredbear is one of the antagonists from Final Nights 3 Nightmares Awoken. He's only active on Night 5 and found in the left hallway. Grim Fredbear resembles the normal golden Fredbear suit, only with his suit glowing a deep purple while the interior of the suit glows a bright white. His upper face appears to be torn off, including his eyes, leaving an empty, hollow, gaping hole in its place. The inside of the mask, though it appears like there's nothing really inside, actually conceals a white, pale human head that can only be seen during his jump scare. And before you ask, yes, it's mine. The animatronic is clearly meant to be a reference to Shadow Freddy and the theory that the Shadow animatronics were Springlock victims, which was later confirmed by Scott to be false when stating that William was the only victim of a Springlock failure. And in the museum level, which unlocks after Night 5, it is revealed that Grim Fredbear is a Springlock victim, saying, quote, another Springlock failure victim, the second generation of Fredbear. Halfway through in at number 5, liability. The Springlock mechanism is probably the most intuitive thing that FNAF's world invented. The ability to move robotic parts out of the way with enough room for a human to fit inside is insane, and while it may be dangerous, we also drive over 100 kilometers an hour in huge giant metal death boxes, so maybe we can't really complain. While yes, they do have their faults, there's nothing compared to the ability to be both an animatronic and human suit. It's an incredible feat of technology, even if just absolutely the dumbest idea ever. Because it's terrifying for the same reasons that it would be in game. Someone can dress in it and pretend to be a robot, okay? It can clamp down on you at any second, and it has done so multiple times before. The Springlock suits themselves are an occupational hazard that they did not need to end up creating, but like, I don't know, like these things are so hella deadly. Why would both William and Henry allow for their employees to wear them? Especially Henry, like goddamn. Just make a separate suit for the animatronic, okay? Like make a separate suit that your employee can wear. It's the employees, the people who run your business. They make you money, so that, you know, they don't end up dying from robotic bits replacing their, you know, normal human organic bits in a hot suit that fails when it gets moist. You know, sweat, breathing. Yeah, I would never get in one of those things. Even if there hadn't been an incident before, okay, that just seems like a lawsuit waiting to happen. And I don't want to be the one whose family sues because I'm too dead to do it myself, alright? So, no. It's a myth that they shouldn't have gotten sued. And ultimately, in at number 2, missing children. Much like the Cassidy situation, the entirety of the missing children involved in the missing children's incident may have been Springlock victims. We're still unsure as to the method of extermination that William used on the screaming pests. Sorry, the kids who run around in my building hallways they're still getting to me. If they ever go missing though, these videos are not going to help me. Anyway, we don't know how William dispatched of these kids before shoving them into the suits, and honestly, there may not be a way that he killed them before shoving them in. The act of putting them in the suits may very well have been what killed them, which would make sense given that a Springlock incident would be more agonizing than a simple knife to the chest. And a Springlock collapse would be a more realistic way for the suits to start leaking blood and other fluids, since one knife wound wouldn't really do that, especially around their eyes. Even if the suits didn't like snap closed, if William shoved them into the suits, that's close enough for me. And at 9, the Twisted Ones. The Twisted Ones novel starts a year after the Silver Eyes ended, with Charlie in university. One day, however, Clay Burke comes to see Charlie, and for some reason brings her to see a corpse with familiar wounds. This could either be because she would recognize them, or because she was working with the police, or because they had to advance the plot. I don't know, I haven't read the original novels, but I want to. However, looking at the wounds, she confirms that they are in fact a Springlock failure, meaning that we have an unnamed Springlock victim in the Twisted Ones novel. If this character does have have a name, like if it's revealed in later down the line or something, please let me know, because I couldn't find one online. However, while this may seem insignificant to you, the real horror of this number comes from what it signifies. This Springlock marks the return of William Afton, since at the same time, Clay also tells her that a blood sample they took from Afton showed that the body was a fake, or at least it was fake blood. The return of a killer, and the purple guy of all of them, that's pretty damn scary if you ask me. And it ain't the new kid. Continuing with the theme of FNAF books, what about the story The New Kid from 1:35 AM, the third Fazbear Frights book? The story revolves around Devon, Mick, and Kelsey. Devon and Mick are outcasts. They aren't popular, they aren't cool, but when the new kid Kelsey arrives at their school, they make a new friend, despite Kelsey being charismatic and adored by everyone else in the school. Over time though, Devon grows jealous of Kelsey, since Kelsey has everything that Devon wants. So in an act of revenge or to gain control, because you know that's kind of serial killery, Devon hatches a plan to lure Kelsey to an abandoned Freddy Fazbear's to trap him in a Springlock suit for a couple hours, to try to humble him, I guess. But the plan goes horribly wrong. After getting in the suit, the Springlocks fail, as expected, because you know this is a FNAF book, causing Kelsey's blood to soak into the fur of the animatronic and pool around the ground. Devon and Mick leave Kelsey for dead so that they won't get in trouble, but something doesn't feel right. So a week later, Devon returns to make sure that Kelsey's body is still there, for some reason. He sticks his hand into the animatronic's mouth to feel if it's there, and snap! The Springlocks fail yet again, as per usual, and Devon gets his hand stuck inside the suit and bleeds out, but not before seeing a body in the suit, but with black hair instead of Kelsey's blonde hair. If that's not scary, then you need to go see a doctor, because that's bone chilling. That's messed up. No. And it's 7, Michael Afton. This relies on heavy speculation and assumption. However, if the entered enema is truly what killed Michael's body, then could it be considered a spring locking? We don't really know if the Funtime animatronics have spring locks, but we can assume that they do thanks to their moving parts and abilities like a giant claw that goes out and stores items. But this would also mean that Ennard would have at least some of those same parts. So if the Funtime animatronics that were made around the same time as the original Springlock animatronics used similar parts or techniques, which is likely, that means that Michael Afton would also be a Springlock victim. We don't need solid proof since this is a possible Springlocking victims list, so proof of possibility is all I really need. And honestly, I think that this would provide a good explanation as to why he turned purple, since people who die don't turn purple. Instead, if they rot, they would most likely be depicted as green, especially when another major character is linked to the color purple. So, if that is indeed bruising, it would make sense if the Springlock mechanisms were hurting him from the inside out. And at 6, Grim Chica. The first Springlock victim in the Final Nights series, Grim Chica is a primary antagonist in Final Nights 3 Nightmares Awoken. Unlike others, she is not a Reaper animatronic. Grim Chica holds a strong appearance to the Springlock suit on the poster in the Night 3 cutscene, but her faceplates are very hard to spot and she's almost entirely purple. She really resembles Toy Chica. The glowing accents inside of her resemble a human corpse. She lacks a bib unlike the original Chica, and her overall body is very slim like the original Toy Chica, except for her hips, which appear to be much wider. Got the baby birth in hips. I regret that immediately. And she lacks shoulders or upper arms, with her forearms protruding from her armpits. Grim Chica is also revealed to be a Springlock victim in the museum level, saying, quote, "A victim of a Springlock failure, forever forced to haunt the suit she is wearing, now being manipulated by your sister and mother. Tried spray on tan, still very pale." Why is that so relatable to me? Like, no matter what I do, I'll always be pale and pasty. Not the whole being manipulated by your sister and mother thing. That's weird. But like, I'm okay with forever being pasty. However, I did rank this above Grim Foxy because, like, it's Chica. And look what they did to my girl Chica. I'm sorry, Mommy Kentucky, for the transgressions. And at 4, Golden Call. As a human, when alive, Golden Call's name was Kyle. However, he is now a Springlock victim stuck inside a Golden Freddy Springlock suit. Golden Call has the typical rundown Springlock suit vibe, similar to Springtrap. However, this is even more gruesome. His left ear is bent, he has guts coming out of basically every hole in his body, human eyes are hanging out of the animatronic's eye sockets. He's even missing exosuit on his right foot, and the character is holding a flesh-colored, at least it's flesh-colored, it may be even like fully like a flesh phone in his right hand that stays stuck to his head via more flesh or blood strands connecting to the side of his head. It's horrifying, dude. This is a monstrosity. And looking at his age on the wiki, Kyle was only 5 when he got springlocked, which is absolutely nuts and just flat out horrible. So unfortunate, man. He was supposed to be the next best Fortnite player. That's a joke for the long-term subs. You know it. Getting close to the end of number 3, not beefed up. The fact that these animatronics are incredibly powerful is absolutely an insane thing that nobody really seems to grasp. Like the fact that Fredbear was able to crush a child's skull, something that we've covered how crazy is. Imagine if that was an employee, okay? Like ignoring the fact that you think it's a springlock incident or that it's a springlock suit. The amount of power that Jaw has is a hazard for everyone who comes into contact with it. Like goddamn. And before you say anything, okay, it wasn't a springlock failure. I don't know how many times I need to go over that. There's no springlocks in the mouth, and they weren't active at the time. Okay, it can't be a springlock failure. So these animatronics are just insanely powerful animatronics, alright? Which would be explained by them being intended to kill, which also explains why it would have the power to crush crying child's skull. The way I see it, William probably wanted to use the Fredbear suit as his kill suit because, you know, Freddy's the more popular character, but then he had to change to Bonnie after, you know, his son was killed in the suit, especially considering how he saw Elizabeth end up possessing Baby, so he was probably worried that Crying Child did the same with Fredbear. So, yeah, that's the way I see it. Finally, in at number 1, you. A spoiler alert for a fan game, and if I say which fan game, it's going to spoil it. So, if you want to avoid spoilers, click away now, and thanks for watching. I'll give you a chance to do that now. Okay, now that you've prepared for spoilers, A Shadow Over Freddy's is a FNAF fan game created by Phisnom on GameJolt. It released on April 25th, 2018, and since it was made by the same guy who is currently working on FNAF Plus for the Fazbear fanverse, you know it's bound to be good. The gameplay of A Shadow Over Freddy's is a hybrid between a traditional point-and-click game and a free-roaming horror game. The player wakes up to find themselves with no memories in a black and white abandoned Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and is tasked with surviving 5 nights in escaping the restaurant. The player is given a different task each night and must complete said task before 6 AM and without being attacked by any roaming animatronics. However, the ending of the game has you getting trapped in a springlock suit and left to rot, meaning that you are a springlock victim, which is probably the scariest victim of them all, cause I don't know about you, but I'd rather not get springlocked. Although I know there are plenty of you that would just love that. You'd fill the suit with liquids that aren't blood, and that's messed up. Like, I'm not one for kink shaming, but yeah, there's kinks, and then there's like being killed, you know? I don't know how else to put that.